Namaste. Thank you so much for dropping by this video. Let's take a moment and tune into, remind ourselves, call on the presence of the infinite, always all around us, always within us. Just up to us to take a moment and notice. Thank you so very much for dropping by this video. So, first of all, please don't believe anything I say. Please find out for yourself whether or not it's true. And actually, please don't believe anything that anyone says. Find out for yourself if it's true, especially if they're a spiritual teacher, especially if they charge money. Times 1,000 if they're a spiritual teacher and they charge money for their services. So I got such an amazing comment. Thank you so very much. The essence of it is someone got involved in a cult-like group that was using the work of Byron Katie. It says, the person says, using Byron Katie's work to brainwash their members for profit. Then later on, the person said, I'm still trying to process how a group with no affiliation to Neo Advaita was still able to use Neo Advaita to manipulate and gaslight. So, love the topic. Thank you. I'm very familiar with the work of Byron Katie. I spent a lot of time actually with Byron Katie. And that was part of the process that her work, and it is Neo Advaita, I'll talk about that in a moment, is part of what, part of what led me to the brink of suicide. I've been on the brink of suicide for a long time, thanks to Neo Advaita, and hers is one of the Neo Advaita teachings that led me there. So very quickly, Byron Katie is an American self-help author. Many people look to her as a guru and spiritual teacher. And she has a form of she teaches a lot, but it's based around this process of questioning your thoughts. So on the surface, she's not Neo Advaita. She talks about such things as non-duality. She talks about non-duality in different ways, but not from a Hindu perspective at all. She's familiar with such things, but she just kind of does her own thing. And so how is she Neo Advaita? Well, there's two, I have two definitions of Neo Advaita. The first is the teaching. And so I don't want to say she's Neo Advaita, but I want to say her teaching is. So the first teaching, my first definition of Neo Advaita is you don't need to do anything because you already are that. So Byron Katie doesn't fall in, her work doesn't fall into that because she teaches people to make effort, to make spiritual effort. So the second definition is hop right into everyone should do self-inquiry. So Byron Katie doesn't exactly fall in that one either. She doesn't teach self-inquiry. What she does teach, she calls it inquiry, but it's absolutely not self-inquiry in the way that it's taught by Ramana or in Advaita Vedanta. So how is she Neo Advaita? Well, she teaches non-duality, and she teaches it to everyone without any preparatory practices. So she kind of slides in the door in a bit of a very unorthodox way. So I'd like to give an example of how she teaches non-duality without proper preparatory practices. So if someone does something harmful to you, the work of Byron Katie, you're instructed to write down all of your judgments and then question them and then turn them around. So I'll give an example. So for example, I was renting out I was traveling and I was a very short story, so it makes context. And by the way, Byron Katie is against telling your story, but I find it helpful to do it. But anyway, that's another story. So I was renting out my house as I was traveling. The person was treating me very unwell. The relationship was it was a friend. The whole relationship, friend to friend, landlord to tenant, it had gotten very unhealthy. And it kept stimulating stuff from my past that was like tearing me apart. So I was trying to deal with it through the work of Byron Katie. And every day, I spent hours and hours and hours every day doing her work. And so, for example, uh, Harriet is being unreasonable. That was one of the judgments. Um, and so I do the work. Is it true? Yes or no? There's this whole process. But then the last part is then you turn the thought around. Harriet, so that would be Harriet is being reasonable, or Harriet is being unreasonable and she should. Now, here is where non-duality comes into play. Non-duality is actually all about surrender. Most Neo Advaita teachers won't say this, but non-duality is all about surrendering. It's about, as Byron Katie said, loving what is, accepting things as they are. Now, that's a powerful spiritual practice and principle. But if it's not balanced with healthy boundaries, if that principle or practice is taught to someone who doesn't have healthy boundaries, who doesn't have a healthy capacity to say yes, to give an authentic yes and an authentic no, it'll wreck you. And it almost did me, and here's why. Um, so then I would do the process and I would turn it around, and as Harriet is being unreasonable, and she should, meaning this is God's will, and then you find examples of how it's a blessing. Now this is true. Harriet, in that situation, she should be unreasonable. There are many ways in which it was a blessing. And the work of Byron Katie then gives you zero. It teaches you how to surrender, but it doesn't teach you how to make good choices. And as I've said many times, premature renunciation is deadly. Unlike the other premature Asian, that's just embarrassing, not fun. Premature renunciation is dangerous, because what I would do is I would think, I have got to get out of this relationship with Harriet. I need to end um, this tenant landlord relationship. It's not healthy. Then I would write down all my judgments about Harriet or the situation, and then I would do the work of Byron Katie, turn them around, and I get totally blissed out. I'd be like, oh my God, this should be happening. This is a blessing. Like, thank you, Harriet, for being unreasonable. I'd get totally, and then the next day, it was basically stimulating trauma from my past. And the next day, I would get stimulated again, and I would have a trauma response, and I'd be like, I've got to get out of this. I'd go through and I would do the work, and then I get to this blissful place of like, oh, this is the best thing that is happening. This should be happening. Like, thank you, Harriet. You're teaching me so good. So here you can see, and the same thing will happen with traditional self-inquiry. If you're not ready for it, and you don't have healthy boundaries or healthy capacity to make wise decisions, then like let's say I was doing this from a Ramana Maharshi self-inquiry point of view. Then what it'd be like, I'd be like all upset, and I'd be like, okay, who's upset? Who is it? And I would just keep going back until I would dissociate from the trauma response and dissociate from the desire to get out of the client, out of the tenant landlord relationship, and then I'd get back to bliss. And then the next day it would happen again, and and then I'd get all stimulated, and then I would do self-inquiry, and I would dissociate until finally I was back at bliss. And see, self-inquiry doesn't resolve such things. In traditional Advaita Vedanta, self-inquiry will not resolve tamas and rajas guna. It resolves sattva guna. And so that's how the work of Byron Katie is Neo Advaita, is it tries to resolve tamas and rajas guna through, in this case, not a self-inquiry, but not self-inquiry in the Hindu sense of the word, but inquiry, a mental process that leads to non-dual surrender. Byron Katie's her final teaching is God is everything, God is good, and then that story goes as well. That's her bottom line, and that's Advaita Vedanta. And she teaches surrender. She doesn't teach, she teaches a cognitive therapy process that leads to non-dual surrender, or is not leads to. No, it doesn't lead to. Is supposed to lead to, but doesn't. So there's that. Let me take a look at this comment anymore. Mm-hmm. I love the person who wrote here. They said, I'm trying to turn a negative experience into an opportunity for growth. Love it. Mm-hmm. Then she wrote, they always make it look so appealing and inviting at the beginning, don't they? And here's another way that Byron Katie's work is Neo Advaita. Neo Advaita said that's maybe the other piece of that's another way of saying what Neo Advaita is just inquire. It will solve all your problems. And that's exactly what Byron Katie's work says. In fact, they call it inquiry. Just inquire. It's a different kind of inquiry, but regardless, that will solve all your problems. And that's maybe a better definition of Neo Advaita, is the claim that inquiry will solve all your problems. So yes, they do make it sound so appealing. All you have to do is just work of Byron Katie, just question your thoughts. All you have to do, Neo Advaita, is practice self-inquiry, and everything else will take care of itself. This is in complete and absolute contradiction to the path of Advaita Vedanta, to thousands of years of Sanatana Dharma, the underlying philosophy of Hinduism. They say there's a few other pieces that are missing: karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Karma yoga, taking on the attitude of being of service. And it also entails renunciation of desires for people, places, and things. Bhakti yoga, attaching yourself to God. Without those things, and those are the things that purify tamas and rajas guna. Without those things, whether it's, self-inquiry is taught by a Neo-Advaita guru, inquiry as taught by Byron Katie, it will fail. And if you take it seriously, it'll put you at war with yourself, and it'll wreck you. Now, the work of Byron Katie is great for like 15 minutes a day. Like if you want to do it just as kind of like a form of cognitive therapy, but if you take it seriously and you're not ready, prepare for misery, friends. Prepare. Same with self-inquiry is taught by, and it's kind of odd that she calls it inquiry, but that's a whole nother story. So there you go. I don't like to name teachers by name. I find it not helpful, but Byron Katie is like her work is its own very specialized form of self-inquiry. Kind of where I'm getting to is, if a spiritual path doesn't have the karma yoga attitude of surrendering your material desires, and striving to be of service to God and doing your duty, and it doesn't have the bhakti yoga attitude of loving God and attaching to God, and it promises liberation, I'm kind of to the point where I consider it bullshit. And of course, there are other like the Buddhists have their own version of that. Like it's not so much devotion to God, but you can find the karma yoga spirit and you can find the bhakti yoga spirit. It's from a different angle. Um, but any path that promises you liberation and doesn't have renunciation and devotion, and not devotion to the path or devotion to the teacher. That's not what I'm talking about. Like if it doesn't have those things built into it and it promises you liberation, especially if they charge money, it's probably bullshit. It's probably worse than bullshit. Bullshit's just bullshit. It's probably destructive. So, I mean, I know someone who did he got really serious about the work of Byron Katie, and he had a full-on psychotic break. He came out of it by grace, but like he was just doing it for hours every day, and he had a full-on psychotic break, completely non-functional for like a month. He was very lucky. He lived in a community, so they took care of him. And but yeah, total basket case for a month. And I doubt he's the only one. And yeah, like I said, the work of Byron Katie really wrecked my life. I was already sort of not well from other Neo Advaita teachings, and once I took the work very serious, it just that's when I really fell apart. I mean, I was already doing not well, but that was in 2016, and yeah. There's more I could say. I've been to a lot of her retreats. I've spent a lot of money on the work of Byron Katie. But for now, I think I'll leave it at that. Let me see if there's anything else in this comment. So the person also said, so I answered this question. The person said, I'm not interested in pursuing that path. So what I want to say is two things. Traditional Advaita Vedanta is completely different from Neo Advaita. So, so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And traditional Advaita starts with karma yoga and bhakti yoga. But the other thing I want to say is Advaita Vedanta, non-duality is just one. It's currently the most popular philosophical school in Hinduism, but it's just one small school. So please don't throw out Sanatam Dharma, the underlying philosophy of Hinduism, including the Bhagavad Gita, because you're done with Advaita Vedanta. I feel done, absolutely done with Advaita Vedanta and non-duality. And India has so much else to offer other than Advaita Vedanta, such as I've talked about qualified non-duality, which says, I am one yet separate from God. I am a part of the whole. I'm not the whole. See, Advaita Vedanta says, I am the whole. If you want to pursue that path, go for it. But I'm completely done with that path. And now I am exploring being what it means to be a part of the whole, to be in service and be in relationship to the whole. So I'll probably speak more about that down the road in this channel. Thank you so much for the beautiful comment. Again, I don't like to mention teachers by name. And Byron Katie's work is its own very special form of Neo Advaita. And love this new definition of Neo Advaita, offering liberation and through non-dual unity or non-dual surrender, through just one practice, through a form of inquiry that will fail, to pacify tamas and rajas guna. Thanks so much, dear ones. Thank you for the beautiful question. Big love.